Good afternoon. Welcome to the National Combined Grand Rounds on COVID-19 in children. On behalf of Department of Pediatrics, I am grateful to Director Professor Randeep Guleria, opportunity of sharing our experience of COVID in children with all of you in the entire. We will share what lessons we have learned and how we are managing these children. With us, we have eminent panelists who are going to join, who will take your questions. We have Venkat Shankar from Children's Hospital of. He is Director of Pediatric Intensive Care Unit in US. Then we have Professor Jayashree Muralidharan from GI Chandigarh. Welcome, madam. She is in charge of the PICU in Chandigarh. In addition, we have Atul Jindal from AIIMS Raipur, who is additional professor of pediatrics and in charge of PICU. Welcome, Atul. In addition, on my left side is my colleague, Professor Sushil Kabra, who heads the Division of Pediatric Pulmonology. And on my left side is Professor Rakesh Lodha, who is in charge of the PICU, along with Dr. Jumma Shankar. She is also Associate Professor and looking after the PICU. So as we know that COVID is not sparing children. And at this point of time, what we know is children have not very severe disease. They suffer from mild, of them are asymptomatic. But simultaneously, we are seeing emerging problem of multi-system inflammation in few of the children who get admitted to the hospital. So we will have two cases. The first case is of SARI, cases of multi-system inflammatory syndrome. So may I request Dr. Kiran, who is doing DM, to make presentation of the cases. Over to you, Kiran.
Today I will be presenting cases on behalf of Department of Pediatrics, AIIMS New Delhi. Moving on with the first case, we have D, who is a 2.5-year-old boy, resident of pre-morbidly normal, now presented with a short history of cough with running nose for 3 days, fever for 1 day which was high grade, documented up to 103 degree Fahrenheit, medications, and child developed one episode of seizure in the form of uprolling of eyeballs and tightening of all limbs, which lasted for about 2 to 3 minutes just before coming to department. There was also history of upper respiratory infection in father 2 to 3 days prior to the symptom onset in the child. There was no history of any loose stools, vomiting, breathing manifestations or decreased urine output. On examination, child was alert. He had a heart rate of 160 per minute with the central and peripheral pulses well palpable. His capillary refill time was 2 seconds and peripheries were warm. Blood pressure was 89/48 millimeter mercury. He had a respiratory rate of 56 per minute with the lower chest retractions, and he was maintaining a saturation of 90% on room air at admission. And child had a temperature of 102.5 Fahrenheit degrees at admission. Anthropometry, his weight for age was less than 3Z score, and his weight for length was also less than lymphadenopathy, edema, or no rash. On systemic examination, on respiratory system examination, bilateral chest movements were equal, bilateral air entry was equal, and there are bilateral crepitations predominantly in the axillary and infraxillary areas. On cardiovascular system examination, S1, S2 were heard and there was no murmur. Per abdomen, it was soft, non-tender. Liver was palpable 1 cm below the right costal margin with a span of 7 cm, and spleen was non-palpable. Neurologically, child was alert with no evidence of any cranial nerve deficits, no focal deficits, and there were no meningeal signs. So with this short history and examination, our initial possibility was a severe pneumonia, probably because of a viral illness, and we also considered a possibility of bacterial causes. And for seizures, we kept a possibility of febrile seizures, and we wanted to rule out meningitis. In view of ongoing pandemic, we also considered a possibility of COVID-19 related infection in the child. On initial investigations, his hemoglobin was 10 gram per deciliter. TLC was elevated, which was neutrophilic. Platelets were normal. His blood gas revealed metabolic acidosis with pH of 7.37. and BAC above 15.7. Lactates were normal and blood glucose was also normal. His lab investigation showed serum sodium was on the lower side with a value of 127, and potassium, calcium and chloride were normal. And CSF was done, which was normal in color and pressure. It was acellular, and CSF protein was 33 milligram per deciliter, and sugar was 49 upon 84, and his culture was sterile. This is the initial chest X-ray, which showed prominent bronchovascular markings and mild haziness in the right lower zone. And the sample for the COVID-2 RT-PCR was positive. So our final diagnosis was severe acute respiratory infection related to COVID infection with febrile seizures and severe acute malnutrition. Initially, child was started on oxygen by nasal prongs at 2 liters per minute, with which saturation has improved to 94 to 96%. He was started on maintenance IV fluids and injection ceftriaxone, and initially was shifted to COVID suspect holding area and was subsequently shifted to COVID hospital, which was located at Trauma Center AIMS after confirmation of the report. And subsequently, hydroxychloroquine was added at a dose of 75 milligram BD on day 1, followed by 75 milligram once a day for total duration of 5 days. Child was continued on ceftriaxone. Oxygen supplementation was continued with respiratory monitoring, and management for malnutrition was instituted. Subsequently, there was an improvement in the child's overall clinical status and respiratory status, and we could wean off oxygen and stop by day 3. Child's oral intake improved by day 2, and we could stop IV fluids by day 4, and child became afebrile, and subsequently child remained well, and we could discharge child on day 10 of admission. Now we will move to the second case with a different spectrum of presentation. We have Y, who is a 6-year-old previously healthy boy, resident of East Delhi, who presented to us on 13 June 2020 with chief complaints of fever for 5 days, rash for 3 days, lethargy for 2 days, and difficulty in breathing for a day. Child was apparently well till 9th June when child developed fever, which was high grade, documented up to 101 degree Fahrenheit, which was intermittent, not associated with any chills or rigors. On day 3 of illness, child developed rash, which initially appeared over the lower limbs and subsequently involved the trunk and face over next 2 days. It was also associated with itching. And subsequently, child became lethargic with decreased activity and decreased oral intake. On the day of admission, child had difficulty in breathing in the form of increased respiratory rate and chest wall retractions, and subsequently child was admitted to us on 13th of June. There were no complaints of cough, coryza, or chest pain. There were no GI symptoms. There were no generalized body pains or any history of any trivial injury. There were no bleeding manifestations, seizures, altered sensorium, or jaundice, or decreased urine output. There was no history of any recent respiratory symptoms in the child in the past 4 weeks. Past history was non-significant, and none of the family members had any recent respiratory illness, and they did not belong to a containment zone. Developmentally, it was appropriate for age. An examination in ER, airway and breathing was open and stable, had a respiratory rate of 36 per minute, and efforts were increased. Bilateral air entry was equal, there were no added sounds, and saturation was 98% and room air. Circulation wise, child had heart rate of 150 per minute with prolonged capillary refill time of 3 seconds. He had a blood pressure of 88 by 42 millimeter mercury at admission. His central pulses were good, but peripheral pulses were poor and skin temperature was cool. Disability wise, he had a GCS of 15 by 15. Pupils were 3 millimeter reacting to light. Motor activity was normal and symmetrical, and his blood sugar was normal. And exposure wise, color was normal. He had maculopapular rash over trunk and limbs, and conjunctival congestion was present. So his initial physiological categorization was as a respiratory distress with compensated shock. Proceeding with further examination, his anthropometry was fairly normal. There was no pallor, icterus, edema. He had bilateral cervical lymphadenopathy, which was palpable 1.5 centimeter, firm in consistency, non-tender. Child had diffuse blanchable erythema over hands, feet, forearm, thigh, trunk and face. There was oral mucosal erythema and bilateral conjunctival congestion was present. On respiratory system examination, bilateral chest rise was symmetrical. There were intercostal retractions were present. Bilateral air entry was equal, and bilateral normal vesicular breath sounds were heard, and there were no added sounds. Cardiovascular system examination was normal. And abdominal examination, it was soft, non-tender. Liver was palpable 3 cm below the right costal margin with a span of 11 centimeters. It was non-tender, soft to firming consistency, and spleen was non-palpable. Neurologically, GCS was normal. There were no focal deficits or no features of cranial nerve palsy. So to summarize, we have a 6-year-old previously healthy boy with short history of fever, rash and respiratory distress, with no cough, running nose or GA symptoms, with no significant family history. And on examination, child had diffuse blanchable erythema over body with oral mucosal erythema, bilateral conjunctival congestion, bilateral cervical lymphadenopathy with hepatomegaly, and child was in respiratory distress and compensated shock at admission. So with this history and examination, our initial possibilities were we considered toxic shock syndrome in view of the clinical features which were fitting into the criteria of toxic shock syndrome. And second possibility was a Kawasaki disease. He was fitting into the spectrum of Kawasaki disease. The only odd feature being he belonged to slightly older age group. And we also considered a possibility of sepsis and septic shock. And we also considered COVID-related multisystem inflammatory syndrome in view of fever, rash, non-exudative conjunctivitis, mucosal erythema, and hemodynamic instability. So subsequently, going on with the management, at admission he was in compensated shock. Child was given a fluid bolus at 10 ml per kg. Subsequently, there was worsening in the hemodynamics and child progressed to hypotensive shock. Later, child was started on inotropic support of adrenaline. With the possibility of Kawasaki disease and toxic shock syndrome, initial echocardiography was done, which showed mild cardiac dysfunction with an ejection fraction of 45%. However, the coronaries were normal. There was no pericardial effusion. At admission, he was started on face mask oxygen. By about 5 hours of hospital stay, his respiratory rates increased to 46 per minute with increased chest wall retractions, and his saturation dipped to 94% on face mask oxygen. Subsequently, child was intubated and started on mechanical ventilation. We have started the child on PSAV mode of ventilation with initial settings of PIP of 24, PIP of 7, respiratory rate of 20, and to begin with, child was started on 100% FiO2, and we could decrease to 60% at the earliest. And we have started the child on ceftriaxone and vancomycin with the possibility of sepsis and septic shock and also toxic shock syndrome. And with the clinical spectrum, we have started the child on IVIG and it was given at a dose of 2 gram per kg over 24 hours. And meanwhile, his hemodynamics have worsened. He required inotropic support of adrenaline, noradrenaline, and milrinone. Child was started on hydrocortisone at 100 mg per meter square, and we could attain therapeutic endpoints at 18 hours of hospital stay. And his initial investigations revealed anemia with HB as low as 7.4, and TLC was elevated, which was neutrophilic in predominance, and he had multiple records of thrombocytopenia. And his renal functions were deranged with urea of 73, creat of 0.8. He also had hypoalbuminemia and mild transaminitis. And the markers of inflammation which were done on day 2 of admission were elevated, including ASR was 35, CRP was 258, PCT was more than 100, ferritin was also elevated, and troponin I was borderline elevated. And his ultrasound abdomen revealed gallbladder edema with mild ascites. We also considered possibility of other tropical infections, and workup for them including dengue, malaria, and streptovirus was negative, and blood cultures were sterile, and the RT-PCR for the SARS-CoV-2 was negative. Meanwhile, his hemodynamics remained stable and child could be tapered off inotropes by day 3 of hospital stay. Respiratory wise, he was continued on PSAV mode of ventilation, and an extraspecial trial was given on day 4, and for subsequently child was started on HFNC, which he tolerated, and we could taper off oxygen by day 6 of hospital stay. Infection wise, we have started child on ceftriaxone and vancomycin, but in view of rapidly progressing shock and respiratory worsening, we have upgraded antibiotics to meropenem. And also we have started the child on doxycycline to cover for scrub typhus. So by day 5, day 6 of hospital stay with all other etiological workup being negative, the possibility of multisystem inflammatory syndrome related to COVID infection was strongly considered, and we went ahead with the investigating for the same, and the antibody testing was done with the Siemens equipment, and a cutoff of more than 1 index is considered positive. In our chat, the value was more than 10. Subsequently, the repeat inflammatory markers were on an improving trend. Child was shifted out of ICU after day 6 of ICU stay and was discharged after 10 days of hospital stay. At the time of discharge, he was afebrile. There was no discontinuation noted till the discharge time, and he completed 10 days of antibiotics. A repeat echo, which was done on day 7 of hospital stay, was normal, showing normal coronaries and normal cardiac function. Child was started on aspirin and continued on steroids, and plan was to taper steroids over 2 weeks, which he currently stopped and is due for an echocardiography in the current week. So we have a child with multi-system involvement, including cardiac dysfunction, with elevated markers of inflammation, with RT-PCR for COVID negative and antibody to COVID was positive. So this is the criteria WHO definition for the multi-system inflammatory syndrome, which is defined by children aged 0 to 19 years of age with fever for more than 3 days and any 2 of the following of mucocutaneous changes, hypotension, myocardial dysfunction, coagulopathy, acute GI problems, and markers of inflammation and evidence of COVID-19, either contact or lab testing, and with no obvious bacterial cause. So child was fulfilling all the criteria as required. So our final diagnosis was multi-system inflammatory syndrome temporarily related to COVID-19.
Thank you, Kiran. Let me ask my colleague, Professor Sushil Kabra. Sushil, why did we select these two cases for making a presentation?
Thank you, sir. As we are aware that in children, more than 95% are either having a asymptomatic, mildly symptomatic or moderate disease. And majority of them can be managed at home or in ward. Only less than 5% may require ICU care. That's why we have chosen these two representative cases. One is common symptom like pneumonia. They can be managed in the ward with just a simple support of oxygen and other supportive care. And the other one is emerging illness. MIS is emerging disease. Still we are searching for the pathogenesis and other associated problems and causal association of this COVID infection. So that's why we took these two cases, and the reason for second case is to familiarize ourselves with this emerging illness. So now we'll be hearing more about what are the challenges and how to manage these very sick patients by our other speakers, Dr. Rakesh Lodha and Dr. Juma.
Thank you, Sushil. So I would request all of you to kindly send your questions on either WhatsApp 9999692364. I'm repeating once again, 9999692364. We will take your questions after next two presentations are done. So may I request Professor Rakesh Lodha to tell us about the challenges in management of COVID in children. Over to you, Rakesh.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everybody. So after the case discussions, we'll just quickly cover the management issues and challenges that we face in children with COVID-19. We'll cover the current status of COVID-19 in children in the country. So a brief on the why children are less affected. The spectrum of illness and approach to management in these children, and the challenges in managing direct and indirect effects of COVID-19 in children. So we have data till yesterday. We had within the country, nearly 2.8 million individuals tested positive. And if you look at the age group that is less than 20 years, it's less than 12%. This has to be viewed in the context that overall within the country, about 35 to 36% population is below this particular cutoff of 20 years. So relatively they are spared. Even at the AIIMS, we have only 2.5% of all COVID cases actually children, and mostly these are children who have been admitted with comorbidities. Overall, the outcomes in terms of the mortality rates also have been low. So of the total mortality due to COVID-19 in the country, only 3% of all deaths are in less than 20 years of age group. To learn more about this, the ICMR is launching a registry to really look at the profile of patients and the outcomes in all age groups, including children. Now, this is data from worldwide data, which again tells us that the outcomes in less than 20 years is reasonably good. The case fatality rates are quite low as compared to what we see in elderly and particularly above those above 80 years of age. Now, a question that comes to our mind is why children are less frequently affected. So children appear to be less susceptible to infection by the severe the coronaviruses causing severe diseases as compared to other respiratory viruses. So we saw this in the SARS-1, MERS, and now SARS-CoV-2 virus infections. Possible reasons would include strict quarantine procedures and closing of potential hotspots for pediatric infections such as schools and daycare centers. It's clear that most of the infections are spread from infected adult family members to children, and during the period of lockdown and restrictions. Isolation of individuals with the infection may also have reduced the exposure of children. Among studies of household contacts, the odds of infection in children were significantly less than that was seen in the elderly. So overall, there seems to be less susceptibility, either intrinsic or also related to the environmental controls. The expression of the primary target receptor for the virus, that is the ACE2, varies with age, and there are reports where the expression may be quite low in the upper respiratory tract, making them a bit resistant to the infections. And the expression in the lungs may have lung protective effects by limiting angiotensin-2 mediated pulmonary capillary leak and inflammation. In addition, we know that children have a strong innate immune response, and also which is facilitated by the retained immunity due to administration of live vaccines, particularly BCG, measles, and so on. And also they are exposed to other frequent viral infections. So there's a possibility that after there is infection, the infection is going to be controlled early and the serious effects may not be seen. On the other hand, the adults show suppressed adaptive immunity and dysfunctional overactive innate immunity response in severe infections, which may not be seen commonly in children, and therefore the difference may be stark. We may say the other way around, that it's the elderly and high-risk groups which are more severely affected, just to explain the same. In addition, children would have excellent regeneration capacity of pediatric alveolar epithelium, and this may contribute to early recovery from COVID-19. And as compared to adults and elderly, the frequency of comorbidities such as smoking and comorbidities and smoking and conditions like diabetes would be less common, which are known to be high risk factors for severe disease. Now, in children, we would have to always talk about direct effects as well as the indirect effects. Direct effects are related to acute infection, respiratory mainly, some GI manifestations. Then we have the upcoming illness, which is multisystem inflammatory syndrome. And then atypical presentations may be there. So recently there's been a series on myoclonus, which possibly may be associated with COVID-19. In addition, children are susceptible to the indirect effects, which would be related to downscaling or closure of regular child and maternal health preventive and other services, closure of schools which would affect the learning. There may be mental health issues, may affect the ability of parents to work. Similarly, nutrition may be affected because of adverse family conditions, and also the midday meal program, which they may be getting some nutrition at school, that's also off at this time point. The risk factors for severe disease include young age, that is, and different studies have shown about 10% to beyond 15% of infants with COVID-19, they need hospitalization as compared to less than 15% in older children. Those with underlying diseases like neurological illnesses, static encephalopathies, seizure disorders, respiratory diseases, chronic respiratory disorders, hematological conditions, and conditions requiring immunosuppression may be risk factors. And certain reports have highlighted the role of ethnicity and also male gender being predisposing to severe disease. This is the approach to classification. I think it's similar to what's there for adults. Mild diseases, mainly sore throat, rhinorrhea, no fast breathing. Moderate disease is basically similar to pneumonia. You have documented fast breathing, but no signs of any severe pneumonia. These are the cutoffs that we use for defining fast breathing as per the WHO criteria. Severe disease, there is evidence of either hypoxemia, increased respiratory efforts, systemic features like lethargy, somnolence, and there may be symptoms like seizures. ARDS, sepsis, septic shock, multiple organ dysfunction would qualify for critical disease. Now, for mild illness, it's mainly supportive care, and home isolation can be done for children as it's done for adults, focusing on hydration and adequate feeding, use of paracetamol in doses of 10 to 15 milligram per kg per dose for fever. One would generally avoid NSAIDs, so there's no specific data, but at this time point when dengue season and all would also be starting, these are best avoided. And we'll need to have a definitive monitoring plan for the child, which the parents would have to take care of, and also explain them the danger signs so that they could access a healthcare facility in case the child shows any new symptoms, signs, or shows signs of worsening. The duration of home isolation is the child has to be afebrile for 72 hours and at least 10 days after symptom onset. And it's now clear that we do not need to document a negative RT-PCR or a CB-NAT test for determining the duration of isolation. Another common condition is we see is mild illness in children with comorbidities, and these comorbidities could include chronic lung disease, uncorrected heart disease, chronic renal disease, and so on. In these settings, if the primary condition itself doesn't warrant admission and the child has only mild illness due to COVID, they could be treated at home if the parents are capable of home monitoring, and there is access to healthcare facilities if any danger signs appear. Otherwise, it may be preferable to admit these children for monitoring and treat as mild illness with only supportive care. Indications for hospital admission include respiratory distress, saturations which are less than 92% on room air, signs of hemodynamic compromise, shock or poor peripheral perfusion, poor oral intake, especially in infants and young children being lethargic, CNS manifestations like seizures, encephalopathy, and then those at risk which we already talked about. For ICU admission, children who have features of moderate to severe ARDS and need mechanical ventilation, shock requiring vasoactive drug support, worsening mental status, multiple organ dysfunction, and within this category there may be kids who fit into the multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children as well. Now this is just it's a busy slide. It just shows us the algorithm, and we're going to focus on the severe pneumonia, which is the severe illness, and here essentially we would be admitting these children in isolation. Those who have low saturation need oxygen therapy. The role of drugs is, we're going to talk about that. One would try and avoid nebulization, and if inhaled drugs are required, one would rather use a meter dose inhaler with spacer. Some of the children may need high flow nasal cannula and NIV, and in which case there is a risk of aerosolization, so one would cover the interface with a surgical mask to reduce this risk. The other component is the critical illness. So here it's recommended to admit in an isolation facility, preferably a negative pressure room. Monitor for secondary bacterial infection, consider antibiotics. You need to monitor for HLH. There may be need for organ support. And then there may be a role for adjunctive therapy like tocilizumab, antivirals, repurposed drugs like hydroxychloroquine or remdesivir. For management of shock, the shock could be due to either something similar to septic shock or due to myocardial involvement. The initial management would be like septic shock, crystalloid fluid boluses about 10 to 20 ml per kg over 30 to 60 minutes. Faster if the child is hypotensive, while we monitor for any appearance of pulmonary edema, increase in liver size, early inotrope support, and monitor for fluid overload. ARDS is managed the usual way with low tidal volume ventilation, high PEEP, use of cuffed endotracheal tubes. One would restrict the fluids in this setting, appropriate sedation, analgesia. And in children who are not responding well, one may try prone ventilation. Non-responding cases may benefit from high frequency ventilation, and a few children may be candidates for ECMO. Here steroids may be beneficial in cases of ARDS. So now moving on to drugs that are being used for COVID-19, most of these are repurposed drugs. Hydroxychloroquine, though there is no definitive evidence for benefit, there are no trials in children. In early stages, one may consider using it at doses of 7 to 8 milligram per kg twice a day on day 1, then 7 to 8 milligram per kg once a day. Remdesivir is approved for use in children, for use in adults and individuals beyond 40 kgs. The dose being 200 milligram on day 1 and then 100 milligram once a day. The studies in adults suggest a modest benefit. There's decrease in duration of hospital stay. There are no trials in children. It's not yet approved for use in children less than 12 years of age in the country. Even though there has been an emergency use authorization by the FDA for children weighing less than 40 kgs, the dose being 5 milligram per kg on day 1, followed by 2.5 milligram per kg once a day. So if it has to be used, it has to be used with caution on a case-to-case basis. For favipiravir, which is approved for use in adults in mild disease, the dosage recommendations are not there. The antiretroviral drug lopinavir, ritonavir, there hasn't been any evidence of benefit, so it's not used anymore. Tocilizumab may be considered in settings where one is looking at a hyperinflammatory response. However, recent studies in adults, large RCTs, haven't shown any significant benefit of use in adults. The dose is same as used in adults. We'll discuss a little bit more about the anticoagulation. Other therapies which are potentially used are convalescent plasma. We are awaiting results of a large trial in adults. Other drugs that people have considered are zinc, ivermectin, vitamin C. But as of today, we really don't have any definitive evidence in favoring their usage. So if there is severe disease in a child with COVID-19, RT-PCR positive, one may consider antivirals. One just needs to keep in mind that the drug is not yet approved by the DCGI for less than 12 years of age. And therefore, the decision regarding usage may be considered only if taking into account the risk benefit on a case-to-case basis and after taking consent from parents. Same thing is true for convalescent plasma and hydroxychloroquine. For tocilizumab, one may consider it in a child with progressive disease and raised inflammatory markers, CRP, ferritin, and interleukin-6, if these are available easily. Otherwise, people may skip the first dose and follow it up later with once the reports are available. For ARDS, the steroids can be used, even though there are no specific trials for COVID-19 related ARDS in children. Now, other challenges which we need to keep in mind are that acute respiratory infections are common in children. We have RSV, rhinovirus, influenza, and the need for adequate testing facilities for proper management and isolation of those with COVID is it's required. So once the outpatient services really open up, we'll need to have specific infection control measures and also adequate testing facilities. We need to avoid overcrowding in outpatient services as well as the wards. And at the same time, for protection of the healthcare workers, they have to be provided with adequate personal protective equipment, PPE. Currently, because we have seen that the children are not really affected in large numbers, which is good, these children are typically taken care of in common COVID hospitals or COVID care facilities. And for children needing hospitalization, one would have to accommodate or have facilities in all of the areas in the continuum, that is screening, the holding area, and the COVID-19 inpatient facility. As the unlock happens, the outpatient services are being scaled up. We need to have a screening facility. There needs to also be a symptom check for the parents and guardians. There has to be a separate area for managing children with acute respiratory symptoms. And those children who have severe acute respiratory infection need to be managed in the emergency room. Infection prevention is something that is critical. We need to have physical distancing. Hand hygiene has to be ensured. Adequate availability of alcohol-based hand rubs would be desirable. Universal masking, having appropriate environmental controls. Now, this is something that is of paramount importance. We need to have adequate ventilation. Wherever there are central ACs, there should be adequate air changes per hour, at least about 12, and adequate PPEs for the staff. For asymptomatic and mild cases, home isolation is recommended, and there are protocols for that. There has to be a defined monitoring plan. One does have to consider the possibility that it may not be so easy to restrict a child's movement into a particular room, and also need to consider risks to the non-infected caregivers, and one would provide them with appropriate respiratory protection. For moderate cases who need admission to the wards, and also for severe cases, there are issues related to allowing of non-infected parents to accompany the child, especially less than 10 years. And in such scenarios, because it's difficult to have the child alone in the ward, one would allow the parent, and after explaining to them and also providing them with appropriate protection. The care of children with underlying illnesses, because most of the children who need admission actually have some underlying illnesses like malignancies or chronic organ dysfunctions. It's important that there is a continuum of care for the underlying illnesses. So it's possible that in the COVID facility, a child with renal dysfunction may be needing dialysis or maintenance dialysis. Nutrition management continues to be important in these settings as well, and also for the fact that some of the children would have significant malnutrition. Now, in terms of the drug therapies, there is lack of evidence for use of repurposed drugs and interventions in children, and also there are concerns about safety of new drugs in children. We wouldn't really have the time to have detailed trials and safety studies. So at this time point, emergency use authorization is being considered, and at the same time, the pediatricians would need to be careful about the possible side effects. We also need to be aware about atypical presentations, and also the fact that a lot of children have asymptomatic infections. The question would always come to the mind whether the presence of the virus in respiratory specimen in a symptomatic child would always indicate COVID. There could be another illness, so we need to be on watch for the common illnesses as well. The other aspects that we need to be taking care when we look at the child care as in a holistic manner. The challenges that have been there are that because of the lockdown and other services being closed, the routine child and maternal health preventive and other services have been compromised. And now that we unlock, there is reinitiation, and we would need a rapid catch-up of immunization services, reopening of the health facilities for usual care. And telemedicine has played a great role, and I think it would continue to play a significant role in the times to come in this scenario. Because of the travel restrictions, there was compromise of the access to healthcare services, particularly for specific disorders, and now that's improving. The schools are closed currently, but as and when they reopen, we have to have a plan for safe reopening. The basic sanitation facilities would need to be improved, universal use of masks, appropriate environmental controls, ventilation of a classroom. There may need to be some operational changes like having a smaller class to facilitate social distancing and also adequate screening of staff and students for symptoms. To sum up, children seem to have less severe COVID illness as compared to adults. Multisystem inflammatory syndrome is an upcoming illness, and we'll hear more about that from Dr. Juma. Mild cases can be managed at home. The care is mainly supportive. Even for hospitalized cases, the mainstay of therapy or mainstay of management is supportive care. We still don't have definitive antiviral drugs which have been proven to be efficacious in trials both in adults and children. If we have to use these repurposed drugs, antivirals may be used early in course of illness, and tocilizumab may be considered in children with progressive disease and elevated inflammatory markers. At the same time, we also need to be aware about the challenges for mitigating the indirect effects of COVID-19 on children and resuming the immunization and other preventive health services for children. Thank you.
Thank you, Rakesh, for a nice presentation. So may I request Dr. Juma Shankar to make a presentation on multisystem inflammatory syndrome. In the meantime, we are getting lots of questions, but I would request everyone to keep on sending more questions on WhatsApp 9999692364. 9999692364. We will take all the questions after the second presentation. Over to you, Juma.
Good afternoon. I am Dr. Juma Shankar, Associate Professor in the Department of Pediatrics. I will be discussing the approach and management of multisystem inflammatory syndrome related to SARS-CoV-2 in children, an emerging illness that has been witnessed during this pandemic. The brief outline of my presentation would be, we will try to understand the spectrum of this disease, the investigations that we may need to send and the relevance of them, the cardiovascular support and the drug therapy that has been used in these cases. We'll briefly review the data from India and abroad. And finally, we will go through an algorithm-based approach to a child with MISC. I'll start with the case presented earlier, case 2 of a 6-year-old boy who presented in the second week of June to the emergency department with an acute febrile illness, was found to have rash and mucocutaneous involvement. He was also found to be in shock and respiratory distress, for which he was symptomatically managed. With this clinical presentation, the possibilities that we considered were Kawasaki disease, toxic shock syndrome, and sepsis and multi-organ dysfunction, which is commonly seen in these areas. The child also fulfilled the clinical criteria of Kawasaki disease. But was it isolated Kawasaki disease or was it COVID-19 related? We needed to explore. We investigated the child and we found that the child had elevated markers of inflammation, but the COVID-19 testing by RT-PCR was found to be negative. The child also had LV dysfunction, as we found out by an echocardiography, and the TROP-I levels were borderline. We worked up for other infections because we wanted to rule out the other infections, and all other infections were negative. But the serology that we sent for SARS-CoV-2 came out to be positive. So these are the definitions given by the World Health Organization and the CDC. And according to these definitions, if a child is presenting with fever, has more than 2 organ system involvement, has elevated markers of inflammation, no obvious bacterial cause, and he is positive for SARS-CoV-2 antigen, or serology is positive, or there is history of close contact, then we may diagnose multisystem inflammatory syndrome in such a child. The index case fulfilled the case definition of multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children by criteria laid down by both of these organizations. So when we suspect that a child has MISC, apart from routine lab investigations, we may need to consider sending markers for cytokine storm. We may need to get an echocardiography to document myocarditis or LV dysfunction. Severe disease has been found in children with severe disease. The cytokine storm markers have been found to be elevated. So the investigations have both diagnostic as well as prognostic significance. The clinical spectrum, the pathogenesis of this hyperinflammatory syndrome is not, as of today, it's not clearly understood. A dysregulated innate immune response to the viral antigen, resulting in endothelial dysfunction, cytokine storm, and the multi-organ dysfunction that follows. This is what has been postulated as the possible pathogenesis of this condition. And accordingly, the presentation that we are seeing is these children may either present as classic KD or incomplete KD. They are presenting with hyperinflammation with myocarditis, or they are just presenting with hyperinflammation with other organ involvement or ARDS. In a large case series recently published on 14th August from US of 570 cases, the authors could classify these 570 children into 3 classes. Class 1, which comprised of 35% of the cases, they saw that this group had hyperinflammation with more than 6 organ dysfunction. And there was cytokine storm, which was present. The most common presentation was GI and cardiovascular. Mortality was low, 0.5% only. But 98% were positive for SARS-CoV-2 antibodies. The class 2, which comprised of 30% of these patients, presented with typical severe COVID illness such as ARDS. They also had myocarditis. And in this group, 84% were RT-PCR positive. Mortality was highest in this group of patients. The class 3 age group was more than 5 years, and this is the group which presented with KD or atypical KD-like illness. There was no mortality in this group. In this group, more than 60% were positive for SARS-CoV-2 antibodies, and more than 30% were positive for both. So they may present with any of the spectrum that I just highlighted, and accordingly, the cardiovascular support has to be tailored to treat the symptoms and the signs that they present with. Broadly, these children require supportive care. We may need to start antibiotics and give immune modulators. Steroids and immunoglobulins have emerged as the first-line therapy in the treatment of this condition. The rationale for both, they are potent anti-inflammatory. They are commonly used in pediatrics. The dose of steroids that is used is 2 mg per kg. In severe cases, those who are presenting with shock, we may consider using pulse steroids. The concerns with both steroids and immunoglobulins are there are no clinical trials. With steroids, there is concern of superadded bacterial infection, while with IVIG, cost and availability is an issue. The dose of IVIG that has been used commonly in this group of patients is 2 grams per kg over 24 hours as infusion. Apart from steroids and immunoglobulins, we need to give supportive care, and as I already highlighted that in view, we cannot rule out tropical infections in these children, so we need to cover with broad spectrum antibiotics. Antiplatelet drugs may need to be started if a patient is presenting with KD or atypical KD-like illness. And in children with more than 12 years or who have elevated D-dimers, low molecular weight heparin also may be considered. Now, there will be some patients who will respond to the first-line therapy and some who may not respond. So in those with severe presentation and no response to these first-line agents, we may need to consider antivirals and immunomodulatory treatment. So what is the evidence for antivirals? As has been highlighted by Professor Lodha, that earlier reports, even though they showed that remdesivir was associated with improved clinical improvement, but the subsequent reports, the subsequent large RCT from China, from Wuhan, showed that there was no difference in time to clinical improvement in the cases or the controls. And there are no clinical trials in children, and the efficacy is doubtful in adults. So we may need to reserve these drugs in severe cases and take a decision on a case-to-case basis. Similarly, for tocilizumab, that is the interleukin-6 inhibitor, preliminary results had shown some promise that it decreased the duration of vasopressor support and ventilation. However, recent unpublished data is showing that there is no difference between the cases and the controls. So again, this is a reserved drug which may need to be individualized. If the second line agents or these therapy fail, the other options that we have is plasmapheresis and ECMO therapy. Now let us review the cases or the case series that have been reported so far. So there are 3 large case series, 2 from US and 1 from UK. The UK ICU series, there were 78 cases from 21 ICUs. More than 80% had shock, more than 50% were ventilated, and more than 70% were treated with IVIG and steroids. About 40% had coronary involvement. The US series, which I mentioned, the 570 children from 40 states, more than 80% had more than 4 organ system involvement. Vasoactive drug was commonly used. 40% had cardiac dysfunction, and less than 20% had coronary involvement in this group. In this group, 2% died. Again, the treatment that has been used even in the US series is IVIG and steroids, used in more than 60 to 80% of these cases. We have 2 large series published from India, one from Chennai and one from Mumbai. From Chennai, 19 children, more than 6 years, the median age was 6 years, have been reported. More than 80% had multi-organ dysfunction, and in these patients, 60% had RT-PCR antigen or antibody was positive, and more than 60% again received IVIG and steroids. In the Mumbai series, again the median age was around 7 years, and antigen was positive in 40%, and antibody was positive in about 30%. Majority had, more than 60% had myocardial involvement, and about 1/4 had coronary involvement. Again, the treatment that has been used in both these, in these children is IVIG and steroids. And in few cases, interleukin inhibitors have been used. There has been only 1 death that has been reported in this series. And now let us see a suggested algorithm-based approach to a child with MISC. So if a previously healthy child with history of fever is presenting to the ED or the outpatient department with fever, and he has symptoms and signs of multisystem involvement, we first of all need to rule out the common causes including dengue, scrub, leptospira, malaria, enteric, and other bacterial infections, but also screen for COVID as per the guidelines. Now these children may have either features of KD or incomplete KD, or they may have features of sepsis, septic shock, toxic shock syndrome. So if they have features of KD, the management is as per protocol for management of KD. We need to send investigations for inflammatory markers, do an echocardiography, send markers for myocardial dysfunction. If these are elevated, we manage the shock, respiratory distress, add antibiotics, immunoglobulin, steroids, and also start aspirin in these children. If there is no improvement, we may consider a second dose of IVIG and IL-1, IL-6 inhibitors. If there is improvement following this, we taper the steroids, continue aspirin, and follow up these children to look for involvement of coronaries. The other group, that is the sepsis, septic shock, TSS, we need to send appropriate investigations, start them on broad spectrum antibiotics, supportive care. If we have facility for echo available, we can go ahead with an echocardiography. If there is features of myocardial dysfunction, we may consider IVIG and steroids on a case-to-case basis in this group of patients. If there is no response, then we consider repeat testing for COVID antigen or antibody. And if this is positive or there is history of close contact, we may consider IVIG, IL-6 inhibitors, and continuous steroids. This is just a suggested algorithm for a child presenting with MISC-like illness. However, the approach has to be individualized based on case to case. With this, I would like to summarize that MISC is a new spectrum of vasculitis and inflammation related to SARS-CoV-2 infection. It's an emerging illness that we are seeing. The spectrum could be either a KD or incomplete KD with shock, multisystem inflammation with or without myocarditis. The clinical presentation is is similar in the Western countries. The first line therapy is steroids and IVIG, the immunomodulatory therapy. Second line agents, the reserved drugs are, you can consider antivirals or IL-6 inhibitors. We propose a suggested algorithm to approach to a child with MISC. However, this has to be individualized on a case-to-case basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Jumma. Can I have all the panelists on my screen, please, Yogesh? Yeah. So I think with these presentation, it is very clear. Number one, that COVID in children is most of the time either asymptomatic or a mild disease. Number 2 point is that we need to be on watch out for multi-system inflammatory syndrome, which is peculiar in children. It is not very common, but we need to be aware about that. Third point is moderate and severe disease, COVID in children, occurs in less than 1% of the cases. Very few. But we need to identify these children because they need ICU management and supportive care in a ICU. And the fourth thing is the diagnosis, lab investigation, and the management is exactly like what is that is used in adults. And we are very lucky that children as such are less affected with severe COVID illness. So we have large number of questions which have been asked to the panelists. So can I have the panelists, and I would start with Venkat first. Shankar Venkat from Philadelphia, CHOP. Shankar, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
So a question to you. We just wanted to get your view on what is the regulation of use of remdesivir in children below the age of 12 years, and are you using this in your ICU?
Thanks, Dr. Devrari, and all the other organizers for including me in the panel. So the answer to your the question is yes. The FDA has authorized the emergency use authorization for remdesivir, and we are using it, but very, very occasionally, as has been elegantly summarized by both Dr. Lodha and Dr. Shankar. I think the initial enthusiasm about remdesivir has not really borne out even in adults. And in pediatrics, we have very limited data. So the only patients who are in the ICU on non-invasive ventilation, high-flow nasal cannula, or on high amounts of supplemental oxygen, or who are on invasive ventilation or ECMO are the ones that we are using remdesivir.
So it means you are using ECMO also in very, very severe cases who are not improving on mechanical ventilation?
Yeah, so far in the last 4 months in Philadelphia, I live in Philadelphia, where our hospital was one of the more, like our area was one of the initially more affected, but right now, fortunately, it's not as common. But we have, of all the 5 months, we have only used 2 patients on ECMO, and both of them had some comorbidities. They were not just healthy children.
Thank you, Shankar. Can I ask to Jayashree from PGI Chandigarh to share her experience on managing COVID in children in Chandigarh?
Very good evening to all of you. Thank you, sir, for having given me this opportunity to be a part of this case presentation, the eloquent presentation about COVID in children and the panel. We in Chandigarh, in PGI, we have a COVID hospital, which is a 200-bedded hospital. So at any given time when there are about 200 adults, we have about 10 children. So we have, total we have seen about 55 to 60 COVID positive children from April, so in the last 4 to 5 months. So as has already been presented, the AIMS data has also shown, fortunately for us, the disease is very mild or largely asymptomatic, and usually the children are affected. Affected children belong to family clusters who are positive. We had only about 10% of the kids who required ICU with ventilation, and about 20 to 25% of the kids had some underlying comorbidity, either congenital heart disease or epilepsy or some kind of a chronic renal disease or leukemia. So that is the kind of proportion that we saw. But we did not see, and out of these 55 patients, we lost 2 kids, both with underlying comorbidities. And the attributable mortality more because of the comorbidity rather than because of the COVID-19 disease. However, we have not seen a single case of the pediatric inflammatory multisystem syndrome that Juma just described. So probably the number of cases which are now cropping up in Chandigarh, we are now spiking here in Chandigarh, the surge is now seen. So maybe in another 2 to 3 weeks time possibly is the time when we should be in the lookout for these inflammatory disorders which might probably
Thank you.
persist.
Yeah.
As far as therapeutic modalities, we have not used any of these specific COVID therapies. The only thing that we have used in immunomodulation is steroids in those who had mild to moderate ARDS, but otherwise use of antivirals or use of IL-6 inhibitors, these have not been used by us in.
Thank you, Jayashri. So let me hear from Raipur, AIMS Raipur, experience of Dr. Atul Jindal in managing COVID in children. Atul, your mic is.
Okay, sorry. Sir, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this elite panel. And as far as our experience in Raipur is considered, we have seen almost 300 patients of COVID till now, and less than 3% of them actually required ICU care. And of these patients, majority of them were actually having an underlying comorbidity, like they were having either leukemia, nephrotic, SLE, things like that, barring 2 or 3 cases which were not having any comorbidities. We had seen 6 deaths till now, and again in these 6 deaths, there were 2 patients who actually were not having any comorbidity, and they were probably the early or the hyper seen in COVID, and they died of septic refractory shock. Most of them didn't require any management, any drug therapy. Only supportive care was given. Except 1 or 2 patients who were really critically ill, and we had to give hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin since remdesivir was not available with us. We had in fact used IVIG in one of the patient, but that patient could not make up and he ultimately succumbed because of fulminant myocarditis. His ejection fraction was only 20% and we couldn't do much in that child.
Thank you, Atul. Rakesh, there is a question for you. What are the contraindications for use of hydroxychloroquine in children?
So I think the main concerns about the long QT syndrome and risk of arrhythmias. So that's the main concern. So and there are other issues related to long-term usage where there may be retinal toxicity, and issues around screening of children are some concerns that are there with hydroxychloroquine. Now, having said that, it's also a drug which has been widely used for various autoimmune disorders. It's been used in SLE in children for long periods of time. So I think the key issue here is more about whether it's actually efficacious than whether it's actually safe. The safety part probably is not of much concern. I think the main issue is about whether it actually works and in what scenarios it works. The data from the studies in adults are still not really convincing. In fact, there are more studies coming in with showing lack of efficacy.
Okay, yeah. So we know the guidelines from ICMR is for children below 10 years of age, we should not use this as a prophylactic agent for prevention of COVID. Is it true?
So I think the indications for prophylaxis are rather, means at least the risk groups are rather clear. And again, with this context, I think the prophylaxis guidelines are not there for children. And if we see overall the kind of scenario that we have in terms of the susceptibility to infection per se and susceptibility to more severe disease, I think it's fine to not really give them hydroxychloroquine for prophylaxis. So I would agree with the current guidelines at this standpoint.
So, Sushil, there are two small questions for you. The first one is, in case one, do you think there is a natural history or some treatment which has made the difference in the patient?
This is a natural history that any viral infection may take 3 to 7 days, or in other way 1 week, and that's how the supportive care the child improved. So there was no intervention, though hydroxychloroquine was given at that time, but there is a doubt that whether it has worked.
Second question is, if a patient is on methotrexate and he turns out to be COVID positive, should we continue it or not?
As far as primary disease is concerned, for which this methotrexate is being continuing, we should continue and observing that progress of the disease. If it is progressing very fast or severe disease, then we may consider that it is being given as a once a week low dose for these juvenile idiopathic arthritis, SLE, or daily therapy for interstitial lung disease. So we may continue, but otherwise there is no contraindication for it.
So question for you, Juma. What are the GI symptoms in MIS? And do these patients often bleed also if they have GI symptoms?
Thank you, sir. So the GI symptoms which have been reported in this case series and what we have also seen are, they are most commonly presenting with nausea, vomiting, and loose stools. So these are the most common manifestations, and if there is underlying DIC or D dimers are elevated, and they may present with bleeding, but that is not the initial the manifestation of GI illness.
So may I question for Venkat? Yeah, so you have lots of fans. They are asking you, what is the role of IL-6 drugs in MIS?
We have not used IL-6 blockade agents in MISC. We have, in my hospital, we have managed so far 27 patients of MISC, and we have not used tocilizumab in any of those. The 3 or 4 patients we have used, that is all related to those who have more of an acute COVID-like illness, who were either on ECMO or were not responding as we expected. We have had the fortunate opportunity of getting IL-6 levels, and in at least 2 of those 4 patients, the levels were pretty high, more than 25 picograms per ml, so there was at least a justification. But as Dr. Rakesh mentioned, the evidence out there is not very strong. It's an approved drug in pediatric use for cytokine storm release syndrome. So we have used, but very rarely, but not in MISC.
Another question for you. Shankar, you manage cardiac ICU there. So there is a question for you. If a patient has got COVID and myocardial dysfunction, what is the choice of drugs you will use?
In terms of antivirals, or so if there is a, so this is, as Dr. Juma Shankar mentioned, the CDC just released last week a large US experience, 570 patients. So the class 2 would be the kind of patients where there's a combination of symptoms of COVID-like illness, like acute respiratory failure, along with myocardial dysfunction. So in these patients, apart from managing their respiratory failure, most of them require some vasoactive medications, and it's very variable across the country. But in my institution, most commonly we use dopamine and epinephrine or adrenaline as the two common agents.
Yeah, so question for Jayashri. Jayashri,
Yes, sir.
so
Yes, sir.
what is your advice to a general practitioner? He's running a outpatient, and what is his role for managing children with COVID?
So, for a general pediatrician who is running an OPD like practice, it is important for them to recognize that children could be asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic, a part of a family cluster. And therefore, one important thing is for the healthcare worker, it is important that they protect themselves when they are managing these OPD cases with whatever is the recommended PP level for that OPD practice. And once they encounter a child where they strongly suspect that this could be a COVID-19 infection, either a SARI or an ILI or whatever case definition the child fits into. So according to the current guidelines, usually since the number of cases have increased, now it is not that they need to be, all mild cases are usually treated on home isolation basis. So you test home isolation, basically only antibiotics, everything else could be normal. The home isolation guidelines which are there released by the Government of India can be given, and identify those children who are at high risk. So that group, from our experiences, infants, those who are having underlying comorbidities, those who may be having some amount of mild hypoxia or pneumonia, they are the ones who need to be recognized by the practicing pediatrician and referred early for admission to a COVID hospital, so that the subsequent investigations, monitoring, and the specific therapy can be decided based on the evolution of these symptoms. As we have already seen, fortunately, the disease is very...
Thank you, Jayashri. So early identification, monitoring, and referral, timely referral is key for a general practitioner. In addition, all practitioner must take all precautions to make sure that they are safe. Proper PPE, maintaining social distancing, wearing mask. So that is very, very crucial for all healthcare professionals who are dealing with children who may land up with COVID infection. So my next question is to my colleague Sushil Kabra. And the question is, if a patient has to develop multi-system inflammatory syndrome, is there some lag time from COVID infection to this, or does it occur in the initial phases of COVID infection, Sushil?
So generally it is an inflammatory disorder, and it takes some time. Body reacts abnormally, or some COVID might have acted as a trigger for starting these inflammatory process. So it takes some time, and generally it may be 2 to 3 weeks later on. And as the date earlier, it was that they will be negative at the time when we make a diagnosis of PIMS, because virus has already been cleared. And then we document that there was some infection by documenting a immunoglobulin against the COVID. But now the data is emerging that some patients may have even a persistent infection. So it is not something that it will happen during the acute phase. Generally, it would be later on. But as the data is emerging, probably it may be in a lower number of patients or less number of patients. It may happen early, but majority will happen after 2 to 3 weeks.
So again, Venkat, there are 2-3 questions for you again. Yeah, so the first one is, what is the role of convalescent plasma in management of moderate to severe COVID infections? Are you using it?
That's a great question. The honest answer is we do not know. Even in the adults, there are case reports with mixed results. In pediatric usage, as has been said by all the panelists and all the experts there and speakers, disease we see is very mild, and we have ventilated at Children's Hospital Philadelphia 11 patients, 2 on ECMO, and those who are on ECMO and 2 others we have used plasma. But I don't know how it's in India, but in US to get the plasma takes few days. And by the time we get the plasma, most of the times the patients are already on the improvement. So we don't believe that it is such a dramatically useful therapy. It's one of those therapies that probably can be used if everything else has failed. But the decision, we will get more experience as time goes by. But we are not using it as.
So we need to wait for more evidence to come, whether it is working or not.
Yes.
Yeah, the second question is, you use dexamethasone for moderate to severe cases, and if you start it, how long you continue giving dexamethasone or steroids? Venkat.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So as we all have used steroids in various forms, and the most recent adult data recovery study has shown that dexamethasone is effective in mild to moderate disease in adults as well. In pediatrics, because most of the children do so well with mild disease, that we are not using it for mild disease. So only patients who are either on non-invasive ventilation or on invasive ventilation, we are using dexamethasone 0.15 milligrams per kilogram dose with a maximum dose of 6 milligrams a day, up to maximum of 10 days.
Maximum of 10 days, you said?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So my next question is to Atul Jindal. I know Atul. Is he around? Atul? Yeah,
Yes, sir.
I know you have managed hundreds of children who were asymptomatic or mild, who were admitted in the early phases in Raipur AIIMS. Tell us, what are the guidelines for home isolation which you follow now in Chhattisgarh area?
Okay, sir. So thank you for the question, sir. And nowadays, those babies and children who are asymptomatic or having mild symptoms, that is just upper respiratory tract infections, without any evidence of pneumonia, they are being asked to stay at home, and the GOI guidelines are being followed, that they have to monitor certain things, and one has to see that there are appropriate conditions where they can maintain isolation. There are no underlying risk factor in the baby, like an infant or an underlying comorbidities, and then the parents are asked to they should be willing, and they are, and there is a surveillance officer who is attached to them, and they routinely monitor these children for their vitals, and the government is also providing them with a pulse oximeter. So they are recording the saturation every 6 hourly, and if the saturation goes below 94%, then they are informing, and they are advised to go and visit the nearest COVID hospital.
Thank you, Atul. Rakesh, there is a question for you which says, can we use azithromycin with hydroxychloroquine for treatment of patients who have got just moderate disease, both together?
So,
And any safety thing which we have to keep in mind?
So I think as such, azithromycin, again, there's a lack of evidence to support the usage, and particularly this is another drug which may predispose an individual to arrhythmias. So a combination of hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin is a no-no. One wouldn't really use this combination at all.
Question for you, Juma. If D dimers are elevated, should we use low molecular weight heparin for the patient? Put your mic on.
The recommendations of the American College of Rheumatology, as per that, if the D dimers are elevated, or if the child is more than 12 years with bleeding manifestations, then there is a role of low molecular weight heparin.
And you showed the dose which has to be used. You
Yeah.
had a table
It
on
was
your
0.75 to 1.5.
Sushil, suppose adult patient has got COVID infection and he improves. Can he come back home and stay with the children? Any risk to the kids?
Yes, sir, he can, because now after 10 days, there won't be any virus detected in his airway secretions. Even if it is there and the person doesn't have any underlying disease, it is more likely to be a non-viable virus. So he or she can stay at home along with children. So the chances of infecting children who has already completed 10 days, 3 days of a febrile period are minimal. For individual, we suggest that, yes, wait for, take rest for another 5 to 7 days.
So there is a question on dengue positivity in COVID. I think is very important. While you are seeing patient with COVID infection, you have to always keep in mind co-infections which may happen, especially patients who are having fever for a longer duration. Even salmonella infection can be there. So don't forget about dengue, malaria, salmonella infection, which can coexist with COVID infection in children. So there is another question for Sushil, is a pulmonologist, about the role of bronchodilators and inhaled steroids in patients who have got moderate COVID infection. Sushil.
So role of inhaled bronchodilator, inhaled steroids, two aspects are there. One is that if it is already known asthmatic patient and he is already on a long-term inhaled steroids or oral steroids or other anti-asthma treatment, even if he gets a COVID infection, there is no indication to stop any of these. They should continue. Other thing is, say it is not a asthma, but a patient is COVID infected and having some wheezing first time, there are no other things to support. In that case, bronchodilators can be given, but and depending on the severity of bronchospasm and other thing, we can take an individual decision of giving a systemic steroids. But if it is a known asthma, we should continue with whatever treatment he is getting, and on the asthma algorithm, like if required, even you can give a systemic steroids.
Thank you. Let me ask again, Venkat, you are in great demand. Question for you. Venkat Shankar, yeah.
Yes.
So there is another
Yes.
question for you. What is the role of TNF blockers in patient with rheumatoid arthritis and COVID positive? Very difficult question.
Honestly, I do not know the answer. We would definitely.
Okay, I think, yeah.
rely on-
So another question for you. Have you used aerosolized this Budicort or corticosteroids for treatment of COVID moderate to severe patients?
No, we have-
Budesonide? No?
No, we have no.
Because again, people are asking this question in Texas or somewhere. People are using that for treatment of moderate to severe disease. No.
I don't believe we haven't used in our hospital, and I don't think I have seen a whole lot of high quality evidence.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. There are lots of questions on COVID positive mother, newborn baby, vaccination, what to be done, what isolation, can mother breastfeed or not. I think that is the reason our director said we are going to have a next national grand round on COVID positive mother and newborn babies. So we'll have that covered because there are lots of questions on that, and it shows people have huge interest on it. We'll take that in the next grand round, which will happen very soon. So let me ask Rakesh one more question. That is on use of mask. People are asking below 2 years, we don't advise mask to be put if their child is going out. How do you convince a child who is 4 year or 5 year to keep the mask on while he is going outside the home?
So I think it's kind of quite difficult, but I think at the same time, when we look around, we do find young children, 2 years old, 3 years old, having a nice small mask, which has kind of been maybe a cloth mask only, with maybe a cartoon motif and a few other things, colorful, attractive, which they may be putting on. But I think it may not always be easy, so one would just rather make sure that you avoid crowded areas or not really go around intermingling with people. That would be one. The other, which again, which has been seen, I don't think there's any literature or as such, is that children are using these small face shields. So these are rather easy to put on, but I guess, mask versus a face shield, it's not going to be easy to convince a child to put on. But when the child sees that everybody around is putting on something like this, I think that may reduce the problem in getting the child to agree. But I think the main thing is to avoid exposure by making sure the distancing is there and you're avoiding going to crowded places, avoiding unnecessary travel. The usual, let's say, going to the parks for playing and all that needs
And
to
the
be cut down.
parents also should wear the mask.
The adults obviously have to put on appropriate masks.
The kid will wear.
It's important, and I think just a point here that in that setting, even if they're using a cloth mask, it has to be used properly, or a surgical mask. But avoid for general people, and one would avoid these valved masks, which at times people are using.
Question on use of interferon in children. Sushil, over to you.
Interferon beta 2A was initially used in Chinese reports, but subsequently now it suggests that it doesn't have any role, so we should not be using it. Initially, people use the gargles or by inhalation, but it is of no use.
Jumma, a question for you. What is the role of using anticoagulants prophylactically?
There are no trials, no series reported, and so
No
difficult
role.
to
No
recommend.
role
Yeah.
of using anticoagulants. You may do more harm to the patient rather than doing good.
Yes.
So I think children are not like guinea pigs. We need to be very sure whatever we are using in children who have COVID infection, it has to be evidence-based medicine which has to be used. We need to look at the national guidelines which Government of India is publishing time and again, and maybe from a reputed institution look at the guidelines how these are to be managed rather than using drugs right left, and many times this may harm the patient. We should keep that in mind. So question 2 again, Sushil, is only X-ray changes are there. Rest patient is asymptomatic. Child should be given steroid or heparin for treatment
No,
if
it
COVID
is the clinical condition of the child rather than the X-ray. X-ray may be abnormal, but that doesn't mean that the patient should be given aggressive treatment in form of a combination of remdesivir, tocilizumab, and others. So, but these patients who are having an X-ray abnormality should definitely be in hospital, monitored very carefully, and given a supportive care. And X-ray is not an indication for starting the very aggressive treatment.
Thank you. There is another one question. If you have elders in the family and a child has got ILI type symptoms, should we do investigation on that child? Yes, certainly you should do rapid antigen test to find out whether the child is infected or not, because he can spread infection to the adults or elders in the family. There is one more question is to Rakesh, I think, is patient is adolescent, obese also, but COVID positive, otherwise asymptomatic. What should we do? What treatment should be done?
I think the just presence of the comorbidity, one would just need to be in home isolation again in this setting. And like Dr. Atul had highlighted that there's a protocol we need to follow. There has to be constant touch with the medical facility or surveillance team. One may be checking the pulse oximetry in between. And I think just one watches out for any worsening of symptoms. Apart from that, the care remains the same. So I don't think that in itself would warrant, particularly asymptomatic, would warrant any hospitalization or getting into a COVID care facility.
Yeah. So there is another question. It is on MIS. Till what age it occurs? I think looking at the literature, below the age of 5 years, it is not seen. Majority of the children who have got MIS are 6 years and above. There is a series which is published in PLOS of three studies. It is a systematic review of 648 patients. Most of the kids are above 5 years of age. So it doesn't not occur in children below the 5 years of age. Again, for smaller kids, good news. So let me get to now Atul Jindal once again. Atul?
Yes, sir.
There are 2-3 questions on this, that in my hospital, I don't have a PICU for keeping COVID positive sick kids. What should I do? So tell your own experience in AIMS Raipur. How did you manage?
Thank you for the question, sir. And at AIMS Raipur, we had converted a separate building into a COVID hospital. This building was initially an Ayush building, and a makeshift ICU was converted into a COVID ICU where both adults as well as kids were kept together. So there is no need for separate PICU, and the team is involved. The team taking care of COVID positive patients is a mix of all specialties, which include pediatricians, anesthetists, pulmonary medicine, from all fields. Even obstetricians are also part of it. That's how a multidisciplinary team taking care of all patients.
Thank you. So let me ask each of the panelists to give one message to all our viewers on COVID in children. And kindly don't repeat the message. So let me start with Atul first.
My message would be that supportive care is the key in COVID, and high index of suspicion and good quality supportive care. There may be multiple fancy drugs which, without doing a good quality trial, should not be used left and right in children.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me ask Jumma. On. Mike.
Now the first line treatment for MISC that we may use are steroids or IVIG.
Thank you. So Rakesh.
So I think we would need to make sure that there is adequate protection, personal protective equipment available for all settings, be it inpatient and outpatient setting, even though number of children are not many, asymptomatic infections, their parents and all may be carrying infections. It's important that we have ensure safety of the healthcare workers.
Sushil Kabra.
So we should be aware that COVID is an new infection, not to worry about it. Majority of the children are asymptomatic and can be managed at home or in ward. But we should be protecting ourselves using all the PPEs and all other precautions.
So let me get to Jayashri, your message.
My message is that children are not miniature adults. So whatever treatment that we are seeing in COVID is all based on adult data. And when we think of using these therapies in children, sometimes a small cohort which is very sick, two things is very important. One, we should know the time frame in which we need to use. We can't be using every drug whenever in the course of illness. Like antivirals will be early, immunomodulation will be later part. And second, we need to recognize the phenotypic presentation, how the patient is presenting. Is it ARDS? Is it multisystem? So those recognition is very important before we decide to use these treatments, for which evidence is very, very minimal or lacking in pediatric age.
So, Shankar.
It's difficult to say something which has not been said, but again, I would repeat that majority of the children are asymptomatic or have a mild disease and do not need anything more than observation or a little bit of oxygen. Very few need ICU, and very few, we do not have very high quality evidence of any effective therapies. So there is no need to throw a lot of drugs, as Dr. Jayashree and Dr. Jindal said. just to again around 3 to 5% of our patients who we screen coming to hospital children are positive, but most of them are asymptomatic.
Thank you, Shankar. You stole what was there in my mind and heart. Number one, that children, most are asymptomatic. The mortality rate in children, even if they are moderate, is very, very low. And third is, as you rightly said, most of them will be cured by just providing supportive care and giving oxygen. The need for ventilation or drugs for which we don't have much evidence at this point of time may not be needed in majority of the children who are suffering with COVID infection. So thank you all, especially Dr. Kiran, who made presentation of 2 cases, Dr. Jumma for giving us overview on MIS, Rakesh Lodha for management of COVID in children, and all my panelists from overseas, Venkat Shankar from Philadelphia, Jayashri from PGI Chandigarh, and Atul Jindal from AIMS Raipur. Thank you for all your contribution for making this grand round successful. And my colleague Sushil Kabra, who is sitting on my left side. And we have been really ably supported by a team which is led by Professor Rajiv Kumar from Department of Urology. Thank you, Rajiv, for making this happen. And the IT team under the leadership of Yogesh, who is working in the Center of Medical Education and Technology, and his team, Dr. Sharif and Ambuj Roy. And I think without we are missing our director who should have led this national grand round, but he's busy somewhere. So we thank from Department of Pediatrics our beloved director, sir, for giving us the opportunity for conducting this grand round. And as I promised, there are 10 or 15 questions which are related to COVID in mother and newborn babies. And if opportunity arises, maybe next week or next to next week, we'll have those taken up with the other experts. Thank you so much. Thank you.